Thank you for joining us today. The program is about to begin. Please make your way to your seats and silence your cell phones. Please take your seats. The program will begin momentarily. This tent that you're sitting in was constructed in 1999 and named after Fritz Benedict and designed by his mentee, architect Harry Teague, modeled after the tent originally designed for the Goethe Bicentennial in the summer of 1949 by Eero Saarinen. The second iteration of the tent, built in 1965 but designed in 1964, was that of Herbert Bayer. Bayer, of course, conceived and designed the entire Aspen Institute Meadows campus, including many of its buildings, grounds, and artworks. Let us listen to the words of Goethe, who inspired the first convening in 1949. Quote, "We are made free not by refusing to recognize anything above us, but, on the contrary, by revering something that is above us. For by revering it, we rise to its level, and by our recognition, we attest the fact that we ourselves bear within us the germ of higher existence and are worthy of matching it."
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margot Pritzker, Chair of the Board of the Aspen Institute. And in that capacity, on behalf of my fellow trustees and all our colleagues at the Aspen Institute, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge, with great sadness, the sudden passing of our dear friend and fellow trustee, Jim Crown. Our thoughts and prayers are with their family. Jim, above all, was a kind and humble man. We're going to miss him really deeply. But I hear Jim's voice in my ear whenever we would try to acknowledge him and his many accomplishments. He would always say, "Thank you, let's move on." So out of respect for Jim and his just delight in the Ideas Festival, that's what we'll do. Thank you all for this moment. And now I'm going to hand the stage over to Dan Porterfield, President of the Aspen Institute, and Cesar Conde, Chairman of NBC Universal News Group. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Margaret. That was lovely. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Cesar and I are so proud to be partners in hosting this great Aspen Ideas Festival. We have had fabulous speakers, great dialogue, and absolutely perfect weather, thanks to NBC Universal. Thank you, Caesar. So this gathering is at the midpoint is always especially important to us as an organization and as hosts to all of you. And as you saw in the video, the very first event hosted by the Aspen Institute on these grounds in 1949 was a 3-week celebration of the great humanists, the life of the great humanist Goethe. It was attended by artists and scientists and thinkers and academics and business leaders from around the world, much like we do here now. And from that first convening, our ever-growing institution has pursued a bold purpose, which we formalized through our Board of Trustees this year, which is to ignite human potential, to build understanding and create new possibilities for a better world. That is what the Aspen Ideas Festival is all about. This gathering expresses and reflects the purpose that has brought people to these grounds for 75 years. And we are especially proud that in moments of division, this institution remains a community where people can gather, engage in conversations, and truly listen to one another, even when we're talking about sensitive or controversial issues. Here, we encourage debate and differences of opinion, insisting that all voices be respected. Civil dialogue is at the heart of the mission and the purpose of the Aspen Institute. It's what we stand for because we believe it offers the greatest hope for understanding and for new possibilities for a better world. Thank you so much. Now I'm proud to welcome to the podium our partner, my good friend, Cesar Conde.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. That's good. So good afternoon, everyone. Dan, thank you so much for your partnership over the last couple of years, but more importantly, thank you for the leadership of this institute day in and day out, the important work that's being done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to have you all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for what we hope you agree is a wonderful, wonderful program we have for you. For us at the NBC Universal News Group, we are so proud to be in our second year of partnership with Dan, with Margot, the entire Board of Trustees, and the entire Aspen Institute on all of the festivals this summer, but with particular pride around the Ideas Festival this week. The collective teams, we believe, have put together an extraordinarily special program over the next few days of what we think are the issues that are most pressing in our society today and across our local communities. For us, we know that we are living in very consequential times, and in the spirit and the mission of the Aspen Institute, for us to be able to collaborate to help bring together leaders, experts from all walks of life, from all perspectives, to be able to discuss and debate the issues that are having most impact on our daily lives is something we are very proud to be a part of. For us at the NBC Universal News Group, being part of that core mission of bringing discussion on these issues is important. But the other part that is very important to us is to do our part in helping bring some of these discussions, some of the best programming that we're having this week at the Ideas Festival, bring that to audiences beyond Aspen. And so for us to be able to do that, we have brought all of the brands, all of the platforms of the NBC Universal News Group, from NBC News to CNBC to Telemundo to MSNBC to our streaming platform, NBC News Now, so we can take some of these important conversations and discussions so that audiences, yes, around the rest of the United States, but also hopefully around the world, can see what we are living in, what consequential times we are living in, and how we can all hopefully move forward together. So today it gives me particular pleasure to introduce the first of our panel of the programming this afternoon. First, let me speak about Lester Holt, who will be joining us here shortly. Lester Holt is our anchor for NBC Nightly News, America's anchor. And Nightly News is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, an incredible milestone as the first national news program on broadcast television. And so excited we're going to have Lester here tonight. And Lester is going to be leading a conversation with Representative Liz Cheney. Representative Liz Cheney was, since 2017 until earlier this year, the representative, at-large representative from Wyoming. And among many leadership positions, she was most recently the vice chair in the House, leading the task force and the hearings around the January 6th on the Capitol. So we hope you'll agree this will be an incredible discussion to kick off the afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Lester Holt and Representative Liz Cheney.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lester. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for being here. Liz Cheney, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
Short amount of time, a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it. If I can get your thoughts on the indictment of Donald Trump in the documents case. You had warned it was a national security threat back when the original search took place at Mar-a-Lago. Give me your assessment.
Well, I think that, we've seen now with the audio tape that is out today as well, that there's just simply no question that he's unfit to be the President of the United States. And, accountability really matters. Accountability for those issues that we've now seen in terms of this indictment over the documents. Accountability for what he did on January 6th really matters. And I say that, I think the Department of Justice has done a good job in terms of the prosecution and the convictions that they've obtained for hundreds now of the people who actually were in the Capitol, for the more senior people, for seditious conspiracy, for some of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. I think it's fundamentally important that not just the foot soldiers are held to account for what happened, but that accountability go all the way up to the top. And if it doesn't, then those things will happen again, and we'll begin to see the republic unravel.
I want to drill down on that a bit later in our conversation, but let me ask you this. After the indictment, you reminded Republicans of something you had said before, and it was you are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. I'm wondering if that doesn't ring a bit hollow now, because he has shown incredible strength through all this, 2 indictments, continues to lead the field by a wide margin for the Republican nomination, and appears to be getting stronger. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that it proves my point. I mean, the dishonor of continuing to defend a man who has done what he did, who failed for 187 minutes to tell the mob to go home, the mob that he had provoked and that he knew was engaged in a violent assault on the Capitol, and then everything else that we have seen since. Obviously, the Select Committee made criminal referrals, and I think that it's very clear for the Republican Party, they have to choose. And the choice is whether or not you support the Constitution or you support Donald Trump. But those are mutually exclusive. And if the Republican Party continues down this path and moves towards, for example, nominating Donald Trump for the presidency, I think that we have seen day after day after day the party go further and further down this path of not being salvageable. And I think the single most important issue, and I mean that, the single most important issue that faces this nation, and we face a huge array of challenges and threats, and they're very complex, but the single most important issue is that Donald Trump never be anywhere near the Oval Office again.
Your committee laid out a case against Donald Trump and his actions on January 6th. Do you expect the grand jury investigating for that part of the special counsel's office, do you suspect that they will bring an indictment?
Well, I only know, obviously, what I see in the news, and I think it's very important, as I said. given what we know he did, given the extent to which we know he attempted to overturn the election, given his direct involvement in the fake elector scheme, given the extent to which he aided and abetted, at a minimum, those who were involved in the insurrection, failing to indict, failing to make sure he's held accountable, carries with it real danger for the Republic. And so I certainly think that it would be proper, and that's the reason why, obviously, we made criminal referrals.
Do you think the DOJ and special counsel has moved swiftly enough, or do you feel like your committee kind of goaded them to move more quickly?
Well, I think that it was really important for the Congress to investigate, and one of the issues that I found inexplicable among many over the course of the last couple of years was how many Republicans did not want to have an investigation of January 6th. And I'm very proud of the work that our committee did in a bipartisan fashion, and I think that it was what we did and what we learned and what we were able to do was to lay out in great detail the facts about what was a very sophisticated multi-part plan to try to overturn an election and to try to remain in office even though he had lost the election. He knew he'd lost the election. And then, of course, the tremendous dereliction of duty when he refused to stop the riot. And not only did he refuse to tell people to leave, but in the middle of what he knew was a violent assault, he sent a tweet at 2:24 targeting his own vice president. I mean, this is behavior that certainly someone who engages in that behavior needs to be held accountable and shouldn't be part of our political process going forward.
And yet there was reporting, I think as recently as last week, that the FBI and DOJ were being extremely careful not to appear political to the point of not moving quickly. How do you assess that?
I think it's very important for them to conduct their work in a fashion that is divorced from politics. I don't think politics should be part of their decision-making. And I think it's important for them to proceed with care and to proceed methodically. But I also think, as I've said, it's crucially important that Donald Trump be held accountable for what he did to this country on January 6th and leading up to it.
You've been quite outspoken and continue to be quite outspoken, but why is your message being rejected, or appears to be being rejected by so many Republicans?
You know, we're in a moment now with the Republican Party we've never seen before in this country. And I think that there are multiple factors at play. One is that there's a cult of personality going on. Another is that leaders in the Republican Party who know that what I'm saying is true, who know how dangerous he is, are unwilling to say so. You know, there's a sense of, well, we're just kind of bystanders here. And so the lies have gone unanswered. And millions of really good and honorable Americans have been betrayed. They still believe what Donald Trump is saying. And those members of Congress, elected officials around the country who know the truth but who are refusing to say so are complicit in the damage that is being done to the Republic.
Do you think he can be reelected?
I think that he must not be. You know, right now, if you look at the polls, he clearly is the front runner for the Republican nomination. I think that nominating him will result in the Republican Party splintering, as it should. And I think that everyone needs to be very aware of the danger that he presents. And I tell this to my Democratic friends, and I have more Democratic friends now than I used to. But, you know, it's really important for Democrats to take him seriously. You know, there can be a tendency I see sometimes for people on the Democratic side to say, well, look, sure, you know, the Republicans will nominate him, the Republicans are a mess, but we'll be able to beat him in a general. And that is playing with fire, and it's a risk we can't take. So I think it's really important for everyone to look at the threat that he poses apart from party ideology and realize it's something that we have to take very seriously and we've got to stand against.
At least on this issue, you seem so far apart from other Republican conservatives. And people ask, are you still a conservative? Is there still place in the party for people like yourself?
Well, I think those are two different questions. I am a conservative. What the Republican Party is doing today is not conservative. I think the most conservative of any conservative principle is fidelity to the Constitution. And when you have a party that has abandoned that, they've abandoned conservatism. So I am a conservative. I also think it's important for us to recognize, we've looked into the abyss as a country, and we've started to pull back, but pulling back completely and ensuring that we don't unravel is going to require thinking about our politics in a different way. And it's going to require that we think about making sure the people we elect are serious, making sure that people we elect are honorable, making sure that they're committed to substance and to policy. And there's nothing better than a substantive, engaged debate with somebody with whom you disagree. If both of you are engaged based on substance, then that's how you learn things, and it's also how you get the best policy for the country. And I think that we have to steer our politics back to those kinds of debates and discussions.
Right now, referencing the Republican run for the nomination, Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson seem to be sharing a lane that takes them right at Donald Trump, criticizing his behavior and actions. How are they doing?
Well, look, I applaud what they're doing. Will Hurd has also gotten into the race recently. I think that anybody who is willing to speak the truth, deserves support and ought to be praised from the outside. I'm only hesitating because I don't know that it helps Republicans for me to praise them. So, but I think what they're doing is very important.
Well, let me ask you this, is there a lane for someone like yourself, which is another way of asking, have you decided, are you going to run for president?
Well, I'm not announcing anything here today, Lester. But, the way that I'm thinking about where we are and what has to be done is much less about, what should I do in terms of am I going to be a candidate or not, and much more about stopping Donald Trump, whatever that takes, but also helping to elect other good candidates, down ballot. And if you think about the complexity of the issues that we're facing and the serious nature of the threats that we're facing, internationally, for example, and then you think about the caliber of many of the people that we've elected, which, there's a huge gap. And I really think as people go in to vote, I urge people to, first of all, run for office yourselves, put your name on the ballot. We need serious candidates so that when you go in to vote, you have choices. And then you really need to think about it. I think, we're at a moment where, Jamie Raskin, who served with me on the Select Committee, who's become a dear friend, says to me often that he looks forward to the days when he and I can disagree again, because it'll mean that we've righted the ship of our politics. And I think in the meantime, we need to make sure that everybody is active and engaged and involved, and I'm certainly going to be doing everything I can to support serious candidates. Also, we need to make sure that our college students are voting. I think that college students around the country are a hugely important voting group to help stop Donald Trump. And so I'm spending a lot of time on college campuses and hoping to get college students very actively engaged.
I'm going to take from your answer that you haven't decided whether you're going to run or not, or you're not prepared to announce it here. By the way, I traveled all this way because I heard you.
Sorry.
No, I'm kidding. But let me ask you this. If you were to run, would it be as a third-party candidate?
Well, I'm not going to do anything that helps Donald Trump. And I think that, I'll make a decision about sort of what I do and what comes next later on this year. But, I feel very strongly about how important it is that we not let slip away what is so special and magnificent about this nation.
Is that a warning to other potential third-party candidates that it might result in making Donald Trump stronger?
Look, not as a general matter, because I think that our politics are undergoing a huge, more than even generational shift, because the Republican Party has so abandoned any pretense right now of, standing for truth and for honor and for character. And when you're in a situation where one of the major parties has done that, then I think you do have to think about what other structures, including a third party, are necessary. And I think we have some time to let that play out and make a decision down the road.
You brought it up, and I think it's fascinating that your voice, you have to be careful who you endorse. So does that take away a lot of your potential influence? I mean, as you watch this campaign begin to pick up speed?
It's interesting because in the last cycle, I endorsed, for the first time ever, 2 Democrats, and actually campaigned in Michigan with Alyssa Slotkin, endorsed Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. And so I think that there are many of us who are serious, who want to do the work of helping to make sure the country goes in the right direction. And those candidates don't always break down along party lines. So, I mean, look, obviously my endorsement in a Republican primary is probably not like something people are really, begging for right this second. So that makes it powerful in another way. I can decide who I might want to endorse and get out of the race.
So you were busy writing a book now. I think the title is Oath and Honor. It's on the idea of preserving our constitutional republic. How do you remove the divides that threaten our democracy? What is it that we as voters should be thinking about doing or not doing?
Well, thank you for the book plug. It's available for pre-order, Oath and Honor. I think several things. One is thinking about American history and understanding, for example, what it means that for the entirety of our history as a nation, we have had a peaceful transition of power. And we have been able to ensure through Democrats and Republicans a peaceful transfer of power. And taking very seriously what it means to put people in positions of public trust. The people who are election deniers, the people who are attempting to unravel those fundamental values of this nation, they're very active and engaged. And so it means that we all have to be. And you can't sit back and think somebody else is going to fill that precinct position or somebody else is going to be on the school board. The institutions aren't going to defend themselves. And so the most important message that I can leave with people today is please get involved. And if you've ever thought about running, do it. Put your name on the ballot, get involved and get engaged, as long as you are going to be faithful to the Constitution.
I think you had a little more blunt answer to that question at an appearance last night. Do I have it right? Don't elect idiots?
That's the shorthand, yeah.
That's the shorthand for that. I have to ask you about our institutions, but particularly here about the health of our criminal justice system. Hunter Biden, as you know, recently pleaded guilty or did a deal with the government regarding tax evasion. Many Republicans call it a sweetheart deal and evidence of a two-tier justice system. Do you think we have a two-tier justice system?
Look, I think that, well, the U.S. attorney who was responsible for the Hunter Biden investigation was appointed by Donald Trump. The Department of Justice, in the statement that they issued about the deal, said the investigation goes on. I think as a nation, it's very important that our justice system not be infected by politics. And one of the things that I have been really moved by has been the extent to which so many of our federal judges have recognized the danger of what happened on the 6th. And, you know, working on the select committee, because we were engaged in litigation, there were a number of instances where we had debates about, you know, what judges would do, and you fall into sort of the traditional partisan thinking about, well, this judge was appointed by a Democrat or this judge was appointed by a Republican, and trying to interpret how they would rule in some of these January 6th cases. And almost without exception, our judges recognize and understand, you know, the damage and the danger to the rule of law. So I think that the attacks that we're seeing from the Republicans on Merrick Garland and on Christopher Wray, you know, are unfounded, and they ought to understand and recognize the danger that they are fomenting by suggesting that this is somehow all political, that this is very serious business.
So the idea that the Biden administration has weaponized itself, the DOJ, is there merit to Mr. Trump's complaints that the DOJ has been weaponized?
No.
Okay. What does a second Trump presidency look like?
Well, there cannot be one. And one of the things that the investigation taught us, one of the things we learned was how many individuals were in important positions where they stopped him from doing things that were even worse. And none of those people will ever serve with him again. And so a second Trump presidency, you know, will not have responsible people at the White House counsel's office, would not have responsible people at the Department of Justice. He said that, you know, he would appoint Mike Flynn, who is, you know, look, Mike Flynn, when I asked him in one of our select committee depositions, you know, whether he believed in the peaceful transfer of power in the United States of America, he took the fifth. And so I think that among many of the other concerns one has to have, the idea of the people that would be appointed and the extent to which they would facilitate the damage that second Trump presidency would do.
Let me play off that question. The former president has been indicted twice, once in New York, and then, of course, the federal indictment. If there was a third, if there was a fourth, which is quite possible, where does that leave the country in terms of any efforts to unite the country?
He must be held accountable. And, you know, I think if you look back to the arguments that Republicans were making after he was impeached, and when a majority of the Senate voted to convict, but it wasn't a sufficient number to convict him, there were many Republicans at that point who said exactly that, who said, look, we know he should be impeached, or we know he should be convicted, he should never play a role in our politics again, but this is just too divisive. We can't do this now. And that's the path that leads us to where we are today, which is, you know, he's giving speeches saying, this is the final battle and I am your retribution. So he must be held accountable. And nobody should have any question or doubt that he'll, you know, do whatever he has to do to get into the Oval Office again. And there's no way that you can unify this country separate and apart from an embrace of the rule of law and the Constitution.
It seems the threat to democracy discussion always brings us back to Donald Trump and election denialism at its core. But are there other threats that we need to look around and acknowledge, other threats to our democracy that go beyond Donald Trump?
Certainly. You know, I think that what we're seeing now is a lesson that I hope we all will learn, that we can't take this for granted, and that, you know, it's not just Donald Trump, it's any election denier. You know, when you have, if you listen to what America's adversaries say about our democracy, a really good guide in terms of who not to vote for is any American candidate who's saying the same things our adversaries are saying. So when our adversaries are saying, you know, democracy is obsolete, democracy is a system that can't function, democracy can't meet the needs of its people, the kinds of things the Chinese Communist Party says, that's what Donald Trump says too. And I think that, you know, we have to recognize the democracy is all of us. And we have to take great care in how we preserve it. We have to take great care in how we deal with each other. And I say this as somebody who certainly, you know, I have tweeted partisan tweets that I wish I could take back over the course of my career. I know that's hard for people to believe, but I have. But I think we all have to say, look, you know, these issues matter too much. And if we don't treat them with care and treat each other with care and commit ourselves to defending our nation, then, you know, all of those things that we've been so blessed to know will slip away.
As I said, our time is short and we have to conclude there, but Liz Cheney, thank you so much for making the trip and being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I can sing.
Yankee Doodle Dandy. We're about to have our birthday as a nation, 247th, and a resilient country, and it's good to march it in with Yankee Doodle Dandy. So thank you. We're delighted to be joined by my dear friend, John Meacham, and somebody I actually do go way back with because he was a friend of Hunter Thompson's, Lyle Lovett, who spent some time here to help us celebrate hear it for Lyle Lovett. And for John Meacham. And thank you, Alan, for the Aspen Music Festival and School, being able to play Yankee Doodle Dandy for us. John has written a wonderful book called Songs of America, and it helps us remember that the spirit of America and the narrative of America has been embodied in song. And Lyle, who brought his guitar, is going to join us in celebrating that. But let me, first of all, ask John, why do we associate America and its celebration with Yankee Doodle Dandy when, if I remember correctly, and from your book, it was a British battle song?
Yeah, it was cultural appropriation back when you could do that.
Oh, we were like...
literally, it was several of the early songs in the colonial period heading into the early republic were British anthems with reworded messages. And so Yankee Doodle was a British fighting song. And
My Country 'Tis of Thee.
My Country 'Tis of Thee, obviously, is, as we say, God Save Walter, is the way we do that song. But he told us to sing that, so that's what we did. And so, yeah, the notion was to try to turn the message upside down and to intimidate.
And the book that, and we were talking about it a bit, is a part of grand themes. But Lyle, your music also knows how to personalize it. And it's sort of that interweaving of the grand, national, and the personal that has always defined American music. And you do it through Texas as well.
You know, I've never thought of my music as trying to reflect, what's going on in the world. I'm more concerned with just making it to the end of the day.
So is the world now.
But writing about the small moments, interactions between people, the way people might feel, the way a person might feel, that's really the heart of...
I really associate you with Texas and that whole theme. How does that come out of the Texas background?
And I was able to listen to wonderful singer-songwriters from Texas growing up, songwriters like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt and Stephen Fromholtz, people who were word-oriented musicians. Words sort of came first to them. Fromholtz, could have been a novelist. His songs all have a narrative quality. I was drawn to that, and I think it was an environment I grew up in. But I write about Texas mainly because that's where I'm from. And I think if a person writes about where he's from and what he knows in a sincere way, it can translate into any place someone else happens to be from.
One of your songs that does that I like is That's Right. And I don't think we have a clip. Can we play a little of That's Right?
You say you're not from Texas. Man, as if I couldn't tell. Well, you think you pull your boots on right and wear your hat so well. So pardon me my laughter, as I sure do understand. Even Moses got excited when he saw the promised land. That's right, you're not from Texas. That's right,
you'll notice Lester Holt was not able to get Liz Cheney to declare for the presidency. But I nodded to Lyle. I said, you want to get up and play? He goes, yeah. So Lyle's going to make this more personal for us. Thank you, Lyle. And don't worry, John's going to do his harmonica right after.
Don't worry. Warm-up act.
You know, I'm just happy to have a gig at all.
Amen, brother.
Let me get these on.
Tell us what you're about to do.
You know, I'm trying to figure it out. You know, I guess I'm thinking of a tune that has a reference to place. It's not, That's Right, You're Not From Texas is a song I made up with two friends of mine, Willis Allen Ramsey and Allison Rogers. And we were overhearing a conversation in Nashville by some folks who were complaining about people from Texas. And which is bound to,
we do that,
it's
yeah.
bound to happen. It's bound.
Have we mentioned that you'd still be part of Spain if it weren't for us?
And we're grateful, eternally grateful.
Meacham thinks that Tennessee won the Alamo.
You know, I made that joke to George W. when he was governor. He went, he said, that's pretty funny, asshole.
Well, anyway, the folks at that table were just talking about how loud people from Texas can be and how unnaturally proud of where they're from they can be, and so we started. The original lyric was "That's right, you're not from Texas, and we don't want you anyway." But we thought even in 1992 when we made that up, we thought we probably shouldn't say that. So we changed it. But and it's true. I grew up in the Houston area where people were from all over the country. We're in the mid 1970s when I was in high school. There were people from, largely from the Northeast. All the major oil companies relocated in the early 70s, late 60s in Houston, brought bunches of people from up north. And so I got a great, I felt like I was traveling places and never had to leave home. Learned about other places. When it came rodeo time, a lot of our friends from up north wore their best cowboy stuff, and it didn't always look right. And of course, we didn't say anything. And so That's Right, You're Not From Texas was an attempt to straighten them out. But references, places, you know, I write about Texas because that's where I'm from, and that's what I know. But I think, you know, everybody is from somewhere, and everybody has a place he or she holds dear. And I think if I write about where I'm from, and if I can get that across, then it'll feel like, or you might be able to think about where you're from. My dad's family came to San Jacinto County in Texas, which is in the Piney Woods, in 1850, and stayed there. My great-great-grandfather, William Lovett was his name. He had lots of children, and his children had lots of children, and there's still lots of Lovetts up there in the woods. And we have a family cemetery with graves that go back to the 1870s, only about 100 grave sites, but that family cemetery is important to our family. It keeps our extended family together in more ways than one. But we have lots of family business, cemetery business to discuss. There are reasons to get together and associate because of the cemetery. Eligibility is one point of discussion always. There are rules that you have to be currently married to a Lovett or descended from a Lovett by blood to be eligible. And that can be difficult in families where they haven't stayed married and there are children, and people have feelings, you know. When my dad's generation was in charge of maintaining the cemetery, the men of the family mowed and trimmed and took care of the cemetery physically themselves. So we'd go up, when I was a boy, we'd go up every 2 or 3 weeks to work, and us kids would play. We'd go running out in the woods, and our moms would bring a covered dish. The cemetery was a joyful place, never a sad place, and I always looked forward to going. And now that I have children, we go up there only occasionally, because now that my generation is in charge of maintaining the cemetery, we hire out the mower.
All right, go for it.
But we get together once a year and reenact the picnic lunch at the cemetery. It's set by a little creek, a little tributary to the main creek that all the old timers in the family call the Branch.
Before spring turned into summer, after night turned into day, they were born a Monday morning in the days just after May, in the days just after May. By the branch, it's there just center. Hey, for me, a happy June, and all the days I love best the 12th of June. I love best the 12th of June. He was strong across his shoulders, she was delicate of skin, and their mother lay there ashen as we held them to our breasts, as we held them to our breasts. By the branch, it's there just center. Pray for me a happy June, and of all the days I love best the 12th of June. I love best the 12th of June. All I have, I gladly give them, and all I am, they will exceed. And one thing I know for sure is they improve the likes of me. They make a better man of me. So to my father and my mother, and all our fathers long before, there are those who walk above us, who remember that we were. They will remember that we were. And to these beautiful two children, and to my sweet and tender wife, I will love you three forever, though I fly beyond this life, though I fly beyond this life. And my other branch, it's there to center. Play for me a happy tune, and know of all the days I love, and there are so many days I've loved. Oh, all the days I love best the 12th of June.
Thank you. Wow, thanks. Thank you. Great. John, you know, hearing Lyle do that sort of reminds me of the spirituality that goes throughout all of American music and weaves through all of American history. I mean, you wrote, you know, The Soul of America, and your Lincoln book is about spirituality, too. And we see it not just in spirituals of the enslaved and freed people, but the hymns that form a part of it. I know you've written a lot about it when it came to Lincoln, and I thought maybe we'd do a clip of the Battle Hymn of the Republic and let you, because it does tie into that spiritual thing. Do we have the Battle Hymn of the Republic?
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword.
In your book, And Then There Was Light, about Lincoln, you tell that story. What did Lincoln say?
It was the noblest tune he'd ever heard. It was written in about 3 hours. Julia Ward Howe had been at the front in Northern Virginia. She'd seen the wounded. She'd seen the devastation. She came back to the Willard Hotel and wrote it overnight. Which is interesting. A lot of the greatest American songs have been written in about 5 minutes, which for those of us who write books really puts things in perspective. But Nina Simone wrote Mississippi Goddam in an afternoon. And the Battle Hymn captured brilliantly the sense of that, in fact, there was a sacred mission to end slavery, preserve a union for all of its imperfections. And as ever in America, every action has a reaction. There is Dixie. There is, which began as a song for performers in blackface in New York. That's the origin of that. Every era has music that reflects and sometimes molds the big political, cultural feelings of the era.
And Battle Hymn, though, is to the tune of John Brown's Body.
John Brown's Body, yeah.
And did she do that intentionally to evoke that spirituality?
To pick up the abolitionist cause, that there was a martyr, that this was a sacred undertaking, that the blood that was shed in this cause would not be wasted.
You know, when you were on the acoustic scene back in the 1980s in Texas, you also picked up some spiritual elements of the song, and one of them is called Church, right? And I think we have that clip too, and I want you to discuss the spiritual side that came to you when you were early on in this song called Church.
And a hush the church did fill, and then a great white dove from up above landed on the windowsill, and the dove flew down beside him. A fork appeared right in his hand. Everybody watching, the preacher ate that bird right there, and then everyone got really nervous. And the preacher, he did start to glow, and as we watched on in disbelief, these were the words he spoke. And the mama's in the kitchen, she's been there all day. I know she's cooking something good, so let's go ahead.
All right, pick it up from there.
You know, that is the great Arnold McCullers singing that verse, legendary vocalist. I grew up in church. I started singing in church. I went to a parochial school, a Lutheran school, and singing was a part of every day. And church and school were the places that gave me my first opportunity to sing. Made me, gave me the idea that I might be able to sing. And so And that song was really just giving our pastor a hard time for having too long a sermon. So it was, you know, sort of taking the feel of a gospel feel, which is a sort of song we never got to sing in the Lutheran Church.
No.
You're asking an Episcopalian?
The gospel in the original German is not strong.
It's, you know, it's yeah, it doesn't work. So, so I you know, I did a gospel feel with this. It's really you know, a story just to tease our minister.
Well, let's explain a bit. You talk about gospel, we talk about the spirituals, we talk about the blues, and then the hymns, like the battle hymn, all with religious roots. How do they, John, flow together in sort of our narrative of America?
Well, we were founded in both with secular scripture and sacred scripture. The most important sentence ever originally rendered in English, that all men were created equal, has roots in the Hebrew Bible and in the Enlightenment era of Benjamin Franklin. It comes from both church and state. It comes from God and mammon. It comes from the visible and the invisible. And, you know, Thoreau said, and rightly, it's like the old minister who was quoting Jesus said, as our Lord said, and correctly, as Thoreau said and rightly, that when he hears music, he is connected to the earliest times and the latest. That it's a suffusion, both, as Lyle was talking about, in the small moments, but also in the biggest ones, in the particular and the universal. And I remember when Winston Churchill was romancing Franklin Roosevelt, Churchill once said, no lover ever studied the whims of his mistress as I did those of President Roosevelt. He was trying to figure out a way to encourage America in 1941 to be more helpful to the cause. And they met off Newfoundland, that secret summit at sea. And aboard the HMS Prince of Wales, there was a Sunday church parade, which they called a naval service. And Churchill specifically chose, O God, our help in ages past, onward Christian soldiers, and eternal Father strong to save, because he knew that that was the vernacular that FDR thrilled to. That was the vernacular of Groton School. That was the vernacular of St. James Hyde Park. That was the vernacular of St. John's Lafayette Square. And so the power of music, both in patriotic terms and in theological terms, is it reminds people of a reality they cannot see but can feel.
And one of the things music has done, which we need so badly now, is that when we are fractured and going through really bad periods, it becomes, I'd say, our common ground, but it's our common chords where we sort of share.
It's a lot. I went through this when I was doing this book with Tim McGraw. Initially, I thought it was a project with Faith Hill. And then McGraw showed up, so that was kind of disappointing. And McGraw thought Thoreau was a running back for LSU, so I say that in front of him, so it's okay. Protest music. It is a hell of a lot easier to listen to a song that represents a viewpoint with which you disagree than to listen to a speech about it, right? You could have been strongly pro-American involvement in Vietnam, but you could hear Blowing in the Wind.
Right.
In a way that wouldn't make your blood boil.
It sort of begins with Woody Guthrie and others, who was I assume, one of your muses.
Well, and Woody Guthrie wrote out-and-out protest songs, but they had that, you said it, music is emotional. Music, you don't think as much when you hear a song as you feel, and that is the saving grace, isn't it?
So I was lucky enough to have a series of conversations with John Lewis in the months before he died, and biographers, we're sort of terrible people. We have these prying questions we ask. And one I ask people that I can talk to, that I'm writing about. If I talk to the dead ones, call somebody. It's like The Shining meets C-SPAN. You don't want that. But I asked Congressman Lewis, what do you dream about? And I thought it would be nightmares. I thought he would have some trauma that would come up at night about the beatings, the tear gas. This is what he said. He said, I always remember the sounds. And he didn't remember the billy clubs or the epitaphs. What he remembered, he told me, was the sound of the feet on the pavement and the sound of the marchers singing. That the music was always there.
Can we leap ahead to We Shall Overcome, which brings together both the spirituality and the Edmund Pettus Bridge? I don't know if you have that one. I don't know who I'm pointing to back.
We shall overcome one day. We shall overcome one day. We shall
Thanks. Well, you know, now that we have somebody from Nashville and somebody from Texas, we New Orleans people wanted to get a little bit of a leg in. So that's Mahalia Jackson from New Orleans. But, go ahead.
Who is responsible, do y'all know this? She's responsible for I Have a Dream. Mm-hmm. You know, so on Wednesday, August 28th, 1963, Dr. King had not wisely scheduled himself at the end of the program of the March on Washington. It was hot. It was August in Washington. The crowd wasn't all that interested in what he was saying. And he was losing them. And Mahalia Jackson was standing behind him. And she knew an audience. And she said, tell him about the dream, Martin.
Tell him about the dream.
Tell him about the dream. And he shifted into an improvisation, which is what became that American scripture. As always, the women saved the day.
That's right. It's been so prolific, we're starting to run out of time, but so I want to do one particular song that after the Depression and things were going really bad, we had the worst of all times. And I guess if there's a song that sort of unifies us in hard times, it's when they played Happy Days Are Here Again. And I think if I remember from the book, they played it at both political conventions.
Yep.
Let them play it and then tell me that tale.
Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again.
John?
So yes, they played that. Hoover tried it. It didn't work as well as he had hoped. And there was an aide to Roosevelt in Chicago who wanted to play that on the occasion of the acceptance speech. Remember, that was the first time a presidential candidate had gone to accept a nomination in person. It's very dramatic. He flew in an airplane. It was very information superhighway. And his staff wanted to play that, and FDR, for all of his virtues, you know, he solved the Depression, you know, we defeated the Axis, he didn't have great musical taste, which gives hope to all of us who don't have it, like me. And he was sort of on the fence. And so the aide just took the album to the convention floor. They told him they were going to play the Star Spangled Banner, and they played that. And it took off. And so that is a sign of, if you're convinced you're right, just hit play.
You know, we have so much more to talk about, but I'd rather hear you play. So why don't you march us out with something healing, personal, about America. I'm putting you on the spot, but anything you want to say, even a tribute to Hunter Thompson if you need to.
It's great to see you again, Walter. And meeting John Meacham for the first time is a thrill. I've been a fan of John Meacham's, from watching him on Morning Joe and reading his books. Your eulogy at President Bush's funeral was just so moving. It was one of those such a... I got to attend a wonderful evening in Walter Isaacson's office on Halloween of 1997, and Dr. Thompson was there. He had written a story for the magazine about his experience in the film, in the Terry Gilliam film of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Johnny Depp, of course, played Hunter Thompson. Hunter wrote the story. Johnny Depp was there that evening to read Hunter's words in Hunter's voice, and it was an extraordinary evening, and I'm confident there were things that happened in your office that night that never happened before.
Not since Henry Luce dined alone.
Yeah. Well, this is a song that I wrote sort of intending to be tongue-in-cheek, but the older I get, the more I mean it. Really. I thank y'all for including me.
I love everybody, especially you. I love everybody, especially you.
There it is.
So if you feel lonesome, remember it's true. I love everybody, especially you. But it's not the long lashes or lips on your face, and it's not your bosoms that time can't erase, and it's not those long slender legs on your feet. Your mind is the feature that makes me remember. I love everybody, especially you. I love everybody, especially you. So if you feel lonesome, remember it's true.
We'll just wait till they settle a little bit. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. That's a hard act to follow. I'm Katie Couric, and I'm thrilled to be back at the Aspen Ideas Festival. As you all, oh, thank you. Thank you, Walter, and my father-in-law, Herb. It's great to be here. We're shifting gears here on a very serious subject right now because, as you all know, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested on March 29th and charged with espionage, an allegation he, the U.S. government, and the Journal vehemently deny. Although Russian prosecutors have presented absolutely no evidence, he's been held for nearly 13 weeks in Moscow's high-security Lefortovo prison and was denied an appeal to end his pretrial detention just last week. Almar Latour, CEO of Dow Jones and publisher of the Wall Street Journal, is here to talk about Evan's situation and the latest efforts to secure his release. So please welcome Almar Latour. So, Almar, I thought it would be appropriate for us to start off talking about Evan. I know he's 31 years old. He's been working at the Journal for less than a year.
Since January of 2022.
So, and what can you tell us about him, his background, his personality, everything?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of a kaleidoscope. He's been with Wall Street Journal for a year and a half, roughly. Has been, during his very still fresh career, been at many news organizations, at Moscow Times, AFP, started as a news assistant at the New York Times. Some of the things that jump out, he's got a sense of humor. We learned this from many different directions. The London bureau of the Wall Street Journal knows him best. He was operating out of London, and so that's where he's got a large circle of friends veering in and out of Moscow. We hear from his lawyers, his Russian lawyers, that he is resilient, very focused. Evan, and this makes him remarkable, the kind of reporter that we all want at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, is really devoted to his trade. He invested a lot of time in learning Russian and really mastering it, getting to know the country that he covered. He's the son of two Russian Soviet immigrants. Evan is so passionate. He's also a soccer fan. He's a fan of Arsenal. The Arsenal fans have really responded to that very well. I think he can be forgiven for being an Arsenal fan, but he's passionate. For us and for all of us, what's incredibly important is the quality of his reporting. Just over the weekend, as we all witnessed these crazy events in Russia, I went back to some of the coverage, and we have links to all of his stories on the Wall Street Journal site. There's one on Prigozhin and the Kremlin and the tension that's building. And it was written more than 3 months ago, obviously, but it was as if it had been written on Thursday. It was very prescient, and you saw all the trends that clearly Evan reported out very early, and that got reflected.
So he's still helping your reporters report on what's going on now, even though he can't report himself. You mentioned his parents fled the Soviet Union in 1979. I know they live in the States now. How are they coping with this whole situation? It must be just maddening for them.
Yeah, imagine for anyone to see your son incarcerated just like that. So they are, given that, incredibly resilient. Ella, the mother, is a force, very, very strong. Mikhail, the father, similar. But it's hard not to see the emotional toll. And when things like this happen, it can just seem like a news event. Some people now, if you meet him socially, say, "Oh, is he still jailed?" And yes, he is. For the parents, it goes on day and night. And we're just really fortunate to work with them. We have a group of people at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones that connect with the parents almost every day, and that's also really important.
Let's talk about your communication with Evan himself. As I mentioned, he was arrested on March 29th. Are you able to obtain any reliable information about how he's doing physically and mentally?
Well, we've only seen him on camera, just the same way that you have seen him during some hearings. So there have been a couple of flashes, and during those, he seems healthy. You see every once in a while a little smirk if he recognizes somebody, and so those are good signs. However, the Russians have broken a protocol that usually is applied in a situation like this when alleged espionage is involved, even though that's totally bogus, that you would still expect an adherence to that. And that entails normally that the consulate or the embassy can go over and check on a prisoner's health. That has happened once. There's been one visit. 3 subsequent requests have been denied. And so that's not in accordance with international treaties, and so that makes it hard to see how he's actually doing. Now, Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, we've retained Russian lawyers for him, and they are weirdly under NDA. They cannot talk about the case because it's a secret trial, and if they talk about the case, then they could be charged with espionage. So it's a Kafkaesque situation, but we do learn from them that he's allegedly in good spirits. There's a couple of other ways as well.
Yeah, in fact, you and I were talking earlier before we came to the stage about his close circle of friends in Russia, and how it's fascinating how they're able to communicate with him and how he's actually been able to communicate, I'm sure in a guarded way, with the outside world. Can you tell everyone about that?
Yes, letter writing, not uncommon for prison situations, has been a forceful way for him to connect with the outside world. Now, this is being reviewed by the Russians and such. At the Wall Street Journal, in the newsroom, where there's so much support for him, people write letters, they get batched, they get sent to Russia, and they're delivered to Evan. He responds to a lot of letters and has indicated that he likes receiving these letters. He writes back in Russian, in Cyrillic, handwritten notes. Those get scanned and then get sent back to the U.S. That's one path. There are friends in London, college friends. He's got, for a 31-year-old, he's got an enormous network of people who love him and support him. And so the letters are one way of expressing that.
And I'm assuming he can't be super honest in those letters. So how do you interpret, I know you got one, and how do you interpret what he's written? And can you read between the lines, if you will? Well,
you just got to accept that the situation is suboptimal, and just still try to pick up the nucleus of it, the heart of it. And in my case, I could definitely see that he was not being fully open, but he did express his gratitude for the communication.
What can you tell us about where he's being held and the conditions that are there? I know this prison is notorious. Can you describe it for us?
Yes. Well, there's a long and sad history of political prisoners in Russia and Moscow in specific, and this particular prison was built for political prisoners. And in a Wall Street Journal story, we reported that it was effectively designed to make you feel lonely and hopeless. So it's not a pleasant place. It's an evil place where somebody innocent, an innocent American, is being held for doing his job, and it's absolutely awful.
Can you pull back the curtain a little bit and tell us what the Wall Street Journal has been doing to try to secure Evan's release and kind of the role of the federal government? Because I'm sure you're limited in what you can actually do.
Yes, thank you, Katie. There's a huge reliance on the government, but we've set up a unit to release Evan, a task force, and it has different components, almost like you would run a very effective business, but focused on one goal. One is relations to the government, and the first task there was to make sure that Evan would be designated a wrongfully detained prisoner. That's a special status that unlocks a lot of government resources, and so that happened faster than we had even expected. As a result of that, we've been working with the White House, with the state, with a special department within state, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, who will be here, I believe, tomorrow, is landing today, who spearheads that office. And they're focused really on securing the release of wrongfully detained people, including Evan. In addition to that, there is a DIY element that we didn't know exists, and I don't wish it on anyone, but you can call it private diplomacy, a law firm that works with us to connect with perhaps friendly governments and other government individuals who could help facilitate a path to release. And so if you look back at some of these cases, including a very recent one, it wasn't espionage, but it was another exacerbated charge with Brittany Griner. There was a trade that happened in the end. And so we're talking to third countries, always in conjunction with the government, always taking the guidance to make sure that we're helping. And the U.S. government is exploring all options on this as well.
Are there efforts being made to find a potential person that could be used as a prisoner exchange, as was the case with Brittany Griner?
Yeah, I don't want to be specific on this given the circumstances, but all options are being explored. We're going all out as a company, I think as a government, and we're incredibly thankful for the work that has happened so quickly. And I also want to say thank you to the many of you in the audience who've expressed support. If for one moment anyone doubts that wearing a button saying "Free Evan" or saying something on social media, if you think that does not help, you're mistaken. That helps a great deal, because there's so many competing priorities in government. We have to make sure that Evan remains a priority.
And keep the pressure on.
That's right.
You know, I know at the time of his arrest, Evan was reporting on PMC Wagner, this private military company, which we've been hearing so much about in recent days. And his last piece was about the deterioration of Russia's economy. And I'm just curious, I know you don't want to legitimize these actions in any way, shape, or form. Do you think that, having said that, do you think it might have precipitated what happened to Evan?
Yeah, I don't want to link it to the arrest of an innocent journalist to a specific story. He was an accredited journalist. He was there with full knowledge of the Russian government. And so to link it back to him doing his job and make it specific somehow can oddly legitimize it, and I don't think that's the right way to go.
Let's talk about the attempted coup, or whatever that was, we all witnessed over the weekend. It's so confusing even now. But given the state of affairs in Russia, not to mention Vladimir Putin's potentially weakened position, and honestly, the chaotic situation that's going on over there right now, how does that hurt or help Evan? I know it obviously complicates the situation, but what do you think is the result of what's happening there on his incarceration, if you will?
Well, so people have been speculating what is going on, period, in Russia. And so all I can say is that there's uncertainty to begin with. And now there is extreme uncertainty layered over that. Now, could some of that result in a breakthrough in the case? We hope so. but more uncertainty stacked upon uncertainty is not something we were hoping for.
Amar, give us a window into what it's been like for your team of reporters, or really any news organization's reporters, reporting from Russia in recent months, really actually since the invasion of Ukraine. People who are simply trying to do their jobs. Many news organizations, of course, have pulled out, but can you talk about the pressure these journalists are under?
Yeah, you can see the results of the pressure that the Kremlin has put on journalism, period. So Friday night, as this all came down, right, there was very, very little information available. Some of the major outlets in the U.S. had very little to show. Only on Saturday did some of that surface, and that's a direct consequence of how little reporting currently can happen in a meaningful way in Russia. For us, we were there in the beginning of the Ukraine war. We're in Ukraine. But in Russia, it's not responsible for us to have a direct presence. Now, we have a lot of experts, a lot of people around Russia who are still doing great reporting, including some of the finest reporting that I would say over the weekend.
But there's no way around it. Not having a presence in Russia has proved very difficult to get to the bottom of what's happening there.
Yes, it's a real problem, and it highlights that this Evan case is also connected to something bigger, right? It's connected to how tolerant are we of autocrats choking off free press. So it's another reason, in my view, to be loud about Evan's incarceration, but also of the hundreds of journalists that have been arrested and are currently being detained all over the world.
And in fact, we have some statistics. The Committee to Protect Journalists has reported a new global high for imprisoned journalists, with 363 reporters reportedly jailed last year, overtaking the previous year's record by 20%. So what do you think is behind this increased hostility towards journalists that's happening worldwide?
Well, it's a deliberate playbook for autocrats that you've seen take place in many countries, Russia probably leading the charge under Putin. You can sort of see it step-by-step consolidation of major media, harassment of journalists, sometimes worse, and pushing out and shutting down certain media outlets. And so that way the autocrat can control the information. It's not, by the way, the only way in which there is a lack of information. If you turn to our situation at home, there are also large gaps in proper information gathering in many towns that we all are from. That is the case. There's no major news outlets that are collecting basic information that can make society function.
The reality is virtually all espionage trials in Russia end in convictions. So do you believe that Evan's freedom will rely on diplomatic efforts rather than any hope of some kind of legal victory?
Well, the legal track record, if you can call it legal, is dismal, and so you have to. It's sobering, and you have to accept that. That said, we have a team of Russian lawyers working on his case that is going step by step. Now, for another wrongfully detained American, Paul Whelan, the process of the arrest, and he was also accused of espionage, the moment from arrest to the conviction was 17 months. And so for Evan already, we're coming on 100 days. There've been 4 hearings, 2 to secure pretrial detention and 2 appeal hearings, and those appeals have been shut down. So the legal path is one that we have to pursue, obviously, because we are in a foreign jurisdiction and we have to play by those rules. But the other part is where a lot of our energy goes, a lot of where the government's energy goes.
Why don't you think Paul Whelan's case is getting more attention, the former U.S. Marine who's been detained, as you said, in Moscow since 2018?
Well, it is actually getting more attention, and wrongfully detained people are getting more attention, in part as a result of the Evan case getting a lot of added attention. So we have a database, effectively a search engine called Factiva, where you can go back and sort of look at sentiment. And what we saw there is, since Evan was arrested, the mention of the word wrongfully detained in 15,000 different sources worldwide has gone up 600%. And so the spotlight on Evan carries a lot farther than his case. And it also is important for free press overall.
You know, a lot of my friends and fellow journalists have complimented the Journal about how you all have covered this story, but I'm just curious, how concerned are you, or how concerned are the journalists writing about Evan? How concerned are they about actually jeopardizing his safety as a result of what they're writing? And how do they balance those two things?
Yeah, the Journal has a relatively new editor, Emma Tucker, who is led with grace. This was a baptism by fire, and the whole newsroom has come together, and so everybody has a shared emotion. So much effort has been poured into this. You raise a really nettlesome point. In the past few weeks, the Russian press made an allusion to that if the Wall Street Journal would continue its coverage in this way or that way, the implication was that wouldn't be good for Evan. And that's exactly how autocrats want you to think, in Russia, but also in other places, to start somehow self-censoring, to somehow hold back. For us, our mission is to deliver reliable information, help people make decisions around the world, and that means we're going to do our reporting. Our advocacy and our reporting are two separate things, and we cannot give up the great reporting.
You recently wrote, "The world is watching." Somebody can give him a round of applause. You recently wrote that the world is watching how the U.S. and Western democracies respond to this kind of affront to free press. What are you hoping in this whole process to teach other organizations, news organizations and otherwise, who may find themselves in a similar situation? Because, as you've said, you're kind of writing the playbook as you go along.
Yeah. Well, we were very blessed to have the help of and the experience, the shared experience from institutions like the Washington Post and the WNBA recently as to how to deal with hostage affairs and how you get through it as an organization. And so we hope to continue to give it our all.
Well, Almar Latour of the Wall Street Journal, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I think we go this way.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Walter. Hi, I'm Brian Green, professor of physics and mathematics at Columbia University, co-founder of the World Science Festival, and there has deservedly been a lot of discussion at the Ideas Festival about AI, and so I thought I would just quickly share my own recent experience, because I wanted to begin here on a lighter note, so I did what most of us would do in the post-November 2022 world would. I consulted with ChatGPT. I asked Chat to write me a joke. Of course, a physics joke, and because I'd be delivering it, I asked Chat to write it in the style of Brian Greene. Here's what Chat came up with. Why did the photon go to the doctor? Answer, because it was feeling lightheaded. Not bad, not great. Hold your applause on that. So I asked Chat, I said, can't you come up with something more clever, something more creative? And Chat replied, of course I can come up with something more creative and clever, but you asked me to write in the style of Brian Greene. Now, in that little joke was the word photon, right? And the photon is a notion that achieves its most refined articulation in a description of the universe called quantum mechanics. And we are now in the 100th anniversary year, or really decade, of the discovery of quantum mechanics, and it's still a hugely active field. The 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to 3 researchers in the arena of quantum mechanics. So what I'd like to do in the brief time that we have here this afternoon is just take us on a tour of where we are, what the state of the art is in our understanding of quantum mechanics. Now, what is quantum mechanics? The best way to answer that question is by comparison to the earlier description of the universe called classical mechanics. And briefly put, in the 1700s and the 1800s, we were able to discern patterns in the motion of objects, and we were able to articulate those patterns in the rigorous language of mathematics. And with the language of mathematics, we could make predictions for how things move. For instance, how a ball would bounce, or how a wheel would spin and travel, or how a object going through space would follow a particular trajectory. But here's the thing, as we pushed our understanding beyond the macro world into the micro world, the world of photons and electrons, we found that the earlier ideas gave wrong predictions, and we were forced through a series of experiments and ideas to change our paradigm from predicting what will happen to giving a probabilistic prediction of what may happen. And if you don't remember anything else from the remarks I'm giving here today, beyond quantum mechanics being a theory that is based on a probabilistic framework, you will have really gotten the essence of the transition into the quantum world. Now, let me just try to give you a feel for why science was forced to this probabilistic description. And there's a simple little experiment that captures the heart of the reasoning. It's called the double slit experiment, and it goes like this. So imagine that we have a little gun that's firing pellets, BBs, at a barrier with 2 openings, 2 slits. You would expect that those BBs that go through the left opening will land in a band on the left, and those that go through the right opening will land on a band on the right side. And indeed, if you did this experiment, this is exactly what you would find. Good. Now let's make one change. Dial down the size of the pellets, the BBs. Make them smaller and smaller. Make them as small as a photon or an electron. Now, our intuition would tell us that the size of the projectile shouldn't matter, and so you would expect exactly the same kind of pattern. Those that go through the opening on the left land in a band on the left side. Those that go through the right opening will land on a band on the right. But if you do this experiment, this is not the pattern you find. Instead, if you do this experiment with photons or electrons, you find a pattern that looks like this. Now notice, it's not random, but it's not the pattern we expect based on our everyday experience. As, say, the electrons go through, the best we can say is that a fraction of a time they land on the far left, and a fraction of the time on the band next to that, and so forth. Now, these are particles that are being fired in exactly the same way, and yet they land in a variety of distinct positions. So the best we can do is describe the motion in terms of the probability of the electron landing in one location or another. And that's what gives rise to this probabilistic description. Now, Albert Einstein, right, the great master of understanding the universe, he resisted this idea of probabilities in a metaphorical, poetic language where he said he could not believe that God plays dice with the universe. Now, Niels Bohr, in a retort that has less fame, responded by saying, Einstein, stop telling God what to do. And indeed, these probabilistic predictions are ones that we hold dear in our understanding of physics, but you might ask yourself, why did Einstein so resist this probabilistic approach to the world? Because after all, we hear probabilities all the time, weather reports, casinos, flipping a coin. But those probabilities are fundamentally different from the probabilities of quantum mechanics because those probabilities emerge because of a lack of detail, a lack of full understanding, right? If you knew everything about every molecule in the atmosphere, its position, where it's been, where it's going, you would be able to determine whether or not it is going to rain. You wouldn't need probabilistic forecasts. But because we don't have access to all of that information, we have to resort to this idea of likelihoods or probabilities. The probabilities of quantum mechanics are different. They are foundational probabilities, not because of a lack of complete information. It's because at rock bottom, according to these ideas, the world is governed by a game of chance. Second reason why Einstein resisted this idea, it went against the grain of his understanding of how the world works, is because when we say a coin has a 50% chance of heads or tails, we know what that means. It's going to land either heads or tails, nothing in between. But in quantum mechanics, when we say an electron has a 50% chance of being here or there, before we actually look, according to the most conventional interpretation of the theory, the electron is hovering in a mixture of being at those two locations. That is so weird that Einstein resisted it. Now you might say, if you were talking to Albert Einstein, say, look, you know, we don't experience electrons in everyday life, so just imagine that that's how things behave way down there, and that somehow when you get up to the big world, we don't encounter this sort of hazy, fuzzy reality that holds in the micro world. And in a famous thought experiment that everybody has heard of, Aaron Schrodinger showed that notion that somehow probabilities could be sequestered in the micro world and not infect the macro world, he showed that could not be true. How do you do that? Well, you imagine they have a cat in a box. If the electron's on the left-hand side, the cat lives. But if the electron's on the right, some poison is released and the cat dies. Now he says, what if that electron is in a fuzzy mixture, half on the left and half on the right? Would that mean the cat is in a fuzzy mixture of being alive and dead? Now that is such a weird idea. A cat being a mixture of being alive and dead, that this gives some feel for why Einstein resisted this. So why would we physicists accept quantum mechanics? The answer is, it's not just pictures. We have mathematics. And mathematics makes predictions. The predictions are borne out by experiment. Now, every time that I've been on this very stage in the past, and I turned to mathematics, I never did it alone. I always did it with two particular, very special helpers. Alec and Sophia, come up here 1 second. So here, on this t-shirt, is the standard model of particle physics. Sophia, what is that symbol meant to describe?
A A Higgs field.
A Higgs field, yes. And this term over here, what is that, man?
A Higgs potential.
A Higgs potential. Thank you very much. Backed by command, performance. Can I have my two helpers, Alec and Sophia? What equation do we have right here?
Einstein field equation.
What do we have over here?
Schwarzschild solution.
Right. And now for the, I suspect, the final time that I will ever be able to convince them to do this, Alec and Sophia. All right, so Sophia, tell me what you have on your shirt right there.
Schrodinger's equation for the evolution of the quantum wave function.
Perfect. Alec, what's on your shirt here?
This is Feynman's sum over history's approach, revealing how a weighted sum of all possible trajectories yields the quantum probability.
Thank you both very much. Now the point is, using that mathematics, we can make very detailed predictions for things like the properties of particles. So electrons have a property known as the electron magnetic moment. Experiment, you don't need to know exactly what that means. It's like a little tiny magnet. When you measure that magnetic property, this is the number you get. When you use that mathematics to calculate that number, here's what you get. Breathtaking agreement between theory and observation. And beyond that, once you can describe the microworld with that kind of precision, you can control it, you can manipulate it, giving rise ultimately to the integrated circuit, which is why we have all of the powerful technological devices that we walk around with in everyday life. In fact, 35% of the gross national product relies in this way on quantum mechanics. And actually, I went back to check that 35% just to have the source. You know, I went to, NPR, to the New York Times, and unfortunately, I'm the source of the 35%. And I have to tell you, I've never done the calculation, so it's a totally made-up number. But you get the idea. You get the idea that a great deal of what we produce relies upon quantum physics. But Einstein still, even with the evidence that was available in his time, could not accept that this was the full story. And in 1935, he writes a paper trying to expose a flaw in quantum mechanics. And that flaw has to do with something called quantum entanglement. Let me just quickly describe for you what Einstein found in the mathematics of quantum mechanics. And I'll describe it in a little example. Every particle in the universe, it turns out, it spins at one particular rate, either in one direction or the other. And we have some language that we use. If it's spinning in this way, we wrap our fingers around and we say that it is spinning up. If it's spinning the opposite, we say it's spinning down. Okay, now, just as an electron can be partially here and partially there, a particle can be partially spinning up and partially spinning down, and it only acquires a definite spin when we measure it. So here it's up and down, measure it, we find it to be down. Now that's weird, that reality can exist in this fuzzy haze of multiple possibilities that only resolves itself upon measurement, but I want you to accept this because it's true, and I want to go much further. Here is what Einstein found. He said, look, you could have two particles in this fuzzy mixture of up and down, and you could then separate those particles as widely as you would like. You can then go over to, say, the particle on the left and measure it. 3, 2, 1, measure, causing it to snap out of the haze, and exactly that moment the other particle also snaps out of the haze, even though you have done nothing to it. Another version, imagine we have them in this fuzzy mixture. You go over this time to the particle on the right-hand side. 3, 2, 1, you measure it, it snaps out of the haze, and the particle on the left also does. Einstein called this spooky. Spooky action at a distance. You do something here and it affects something over there. And although I've framed this in a laboratory setting, it can be anywhere in space, across the entire universe, if you like. These entangled particles, according to the math of quantum mechanics, you measure one, let's say I measure the one on the right-hand side, snaps out of the haze. Similarly, the particle on the left does as well. Einstein said nobody in their right mind could accept that this is how the world works. Decade after decade, scientists developed the mathematics further, developed the experimental techniques further, and showed that this is not a flaw of quantum mechanics, it's a feature of quantum mechanics. And indeed, the 2022 Nobel Prize was awarded to these three individuals for all the work that they did establishing that this spookiness, this quantum entanglement, is real, is how the universe actually works. And moreover, especially the gentleman on the right-hand side, Anton Zeilinger, showed that you can do stuff with this. You can teleport objects, particles, from one location to another. Right? So imagine that we have two entangled particles. One, say, is in New York, the other is in Paris. And imagine you want to teleport a third particle, the red particle, from New York to Paris. Here's how you can do it. You take that red particle and you bring it into an association. You let it meld in some very specific way with the entangled particle in New York. That imprints the key properties of the red particle on the particle in New York, and through entanglement, those properties are instantaneously imprinted on the particle in Paris. And then through an appropriate measurement in New York, you can tell the person in Paris exactly what to do to pull out those properties, yielding an identical version of the red particle now in Paris. And in fact, the act of undertaking this quantum teleportation destroys the particles back in New York. So the only remaining version of the red particle is indeed the one in Paris. And this is real. This is not hypothetical. In fact, Anton Zeilinger not only is a very clever physicist, he knows the life that he likes to lead. He has his experiment for teleportation set up in the Canary Islands, La Palma, Tenerife, 90 miles apart. He routinely teleports particles between one location and another. Now, the coda to this story, which of course is one that continues to be developed, is this. In 1935, Einstein wrote another paper having nothing to do with quantum mechanics, having to do instead with the general theory of relativity, the theory of warps and curves in the fabric of space and time. And in this paper, which is with one of the colleagues in the entanglement paper, Nathan Rosen, they showed that there might be things called wormholes, right? This is a familiar idea from anybody who watches some science fiction. What is the idea? That if space can warp and curve, you can have shortcuts going from one location in space to another location through a kind of tunnel, a wormhole-like tunnel from one location to another. And in this particular imagery, anyone who's following the news and has noted that the feds have approved the first ever congestion pricing in New York City will recognize this would be a beautiful way to not enter Midtown Manhattan and be subject to that particular toll. But putting that application to the side, Einstein had no idea that there might be any connection to this notion of entanglement. And what's happening now, right at the forefront of understanding, is this. Work that really finds its origins in string theory and other cutting-edge developments have shown that there is a deep connection between wormholes, which connect one location to another, with entanglement that connects a particle at one location to another. This is the work of Juan Maldacena, Lenny Susskind, and this may very well be the key to realizing the long-standing dream of Einstein's, of finding a unified theory which in the modern language would meld together our understanding of the laws of the small quantum mechanics with our understanding of the laws of the large, the general theory of relativity. So I certainly look forward to future years coming back and describing where this goes, but I want to finish with one mystery, a profound mystery that no quantum physicist, no physicist at all has given us any insight into. Which is this? How could it be? I mean, seriously, think about it. How could it be that Tom Wamsgans could possibly ascend to the throne of Waystar Roco? To answer that mystery, I will now cede the stage to the next discussion, Katie Kirk and Brian Cox. Thank you very much.
Bravo.
So, it's me again. Hi, everyone. Who isn't a fan of Succession and the blustering, withholding, cantankerous patriarch of the Waystar Royco dynasty, Logan Roy? Brian Cox practically reaches and grabs you through the screen with his withering stare, explosive temper, and voracious ambition. Don't believe me? Let's take a look.
This is not the end. Oh, what? I'm going to build something better. Something faster, lighter, meaner, wilder. And I'm going to do it from in here with you lot. You're fucking pirates!
Give him... But this is not Brian's first rodeo. He began his career as a classically trained Shakespearean actor and has spent the last 6 decades working on both the stage and screen, inhabiting countless iconic characters, and not surprisingly, racking up 2 BAFTAs, 2 Olivier Awards, an Emmy, a Golden Globe, and a Screen Actors Guild Award, with many more, I'm sure, still to come. Please welcome Brian Cox.
Thank you.
I'm so thrilled to be talking to you, but first I have to ask you, Brian, do people really come up to you on the street and ask you to tell them to fuck off?
All the fucking time. And I mean, the most bizarre incident of that was when I was in, it was the Golden Globes time, and I was in LA, and Rosanna Arquette is an old friend of mine, and she said, there's a Me Too meeting going on this weekend with Ronan Farrow. He's coming and he's going to read some stuff from his book, and would you come along and watch? And it was full of these Hollywood-type women, and I said, oh, sure, I'd love to come on. But I arrived late, so I'm standing at the back watching him doing his stuff, and it was very impressive indeed. And he finished, and they gave him a round of applause. And they turned around, and they saw me, and they immediately went, oh, they get their devices out, and they went up to me, and they said, could you tell us to fuck off? I said, is that really appropriate at a Me Too meeting? That you ask a white dinosaur like me, because that's what they call me now, I'm a white dinosaur, that to tell you to fuck off? Well, fuck off then.
By the way, I want to just mention that Brian's wife, Nicole, is here, who's also an actress. Nicole, where are you? I just want to recognize you. Hi, Nicole.
Where is she?
Welcome to Aspen.
Where is she?
So let's talk about Succession, Brian. What did you think when you first got that script?
Well, you don't get a script. that's a common illusion. You get a script when you start to do it, but you get the pitch or the idea, and that was what was there for me. And I knew straight away it was going to be a success, because it's very much in. I mean, even though it's a whole different ball game because of the satiric nature of it, but it's very much in the Dallas dynasty. It's in that kind of league of the.
I like how you say dynasty.
Yeah. Oh, it's supposed to dynasty. Yeah. I wish Americans could learn how to fucking pronounce properly. It really does fucking annoy me how you know they have. I get so confused. Anyway, so I knew that it was going, and then because of the subject. And Jesse had written a film about the Murdochs before, and I knew it was just going to be a success. Adam McKay, and the irony was, and this is another irony, so I'm listening to this, and I said to Jesse, I said, you know, he could be Scots, Logan Roy, and Jesse said, oh, no, he can't be Scots, he's got to be American, Adam McKay, on the other hand, and there's another thing that the Americans have done to the Scottish language, we don't say McKay in Scotland, we say Mackay. That's how you properly pronounce that name, Mackay. Anyway, Adam Mackay, he thought, because he's ex-Scot, well, his family were 100 years ago, he said, I think that's a great idea. No, it's got to be American, so we left it at that. And then in the ninth episode of the first series, well, actually in the first episode, they said he's got to be from the States. So I'm working on it, I'm doing it, and again, you get the script incrementally, you don't always get the whole thing. Well, we do a reading, but then they rewrite it. So I get the script, and it says, born in Quebec. And I thought, I didn't know Quebec was in the States. I always thought that was Canada. And anyway, so I was born in Quebec, but I'd already started doing whatever accent I was doing. The ninth episode, Peter Friedman, who plays Frank, who I keep firing and rehiring, he said, they've changed your birthplace. I said, what do you mean they've changed my birthplace? He said, you're no longer born in Quebec. I said, so where am I born? He said, oh, I can't remember. And then he took his device out and he went and he said, oh yeah. He said, somewhere called Dundee, Scotland. And I said, but that's where I was born. And he said, oh, that's a coincidence. I said, yeah, it's a hell of a fucking coincidence. I said, this is the ninth episode, and now you're telling me I'm Scots? And I thought I was American Quebecian, or Quebecois American. I said, this is ridiculous. So I go up to Jesse and I said, so what is with the change of nationality? And this is typical of writers. He said, oh, we all thought it'd be a little surprise. I said, it's a hell of a fucking surprise. I said, I've been working on the show for 9 episodes, and suddenly I'm this Scott, anyway.
I'm so glad I asked everyone at the Aspen Institute if I could drop an F-bomb during this interview.
Sorry,
no, it's
you've
fine.
started me off now.
It's fine, it's fine.
My language is normally quite good until I get into situations like this.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned it's like Dynasty or Dynasty and some other sort of dramatic shows, but let's talk about it a little bit more, Brian. What is it about Succession that just grabbed people and made them, so excited week after week to see what was going to happen?
I think we live in this age of the ultra-rich, and we see it all the time with the horrible Trump and Elon Musk and Bezos. We see the rich are getting richer, and the gap. As a follow-up, I did a program which has not been released here yet, called How the Other Half Lives.
I know, I actually watched the trailer. It looks amazing.
So that was a heartfelt thing, because I had to go home to my hometown and see how poor people had become and how worse it was even than when I was a kid. I mean, depersonalization. In the block of flats that I lived in, everybody had their name on the door, but now they've taken that away, and they all have numbers. So this whole depersonalization that goes on, and the poor are getting poorer, and the rich are getting richer. And then the other thing that goes with the rich is this sense of entitlement. And that's what you're dealing with in the show. And it's satirical, but it's also about the state of the world as it is at the moment. And that's why I think it's a very original and very unique show in that way.
When I was watching it, sometimes I would think, I loved it, and I thought the writing, obviously the acting, but I would kind of say to myself, I don't like any of these people.
No, this is the interesting thing. Everybody didn't like the people, but then they couldn't do without them. They wanted to watch it more and more and more, and that's the strength of the show. It's also, it's also essentially comic in its undercurrent. So there's a lot of that element, and you see it with people like Kieran, and Nick Braun, and even Matthew McFadden, and occasionally me. So. That element is quite strong, that satirical humor that goes through it. And it's also something that's very because predominantly we have 2 or 3 American writers, but it's predominantly British writers. All of them are mainly British. And so they have that kind of sharp political sensibility, to get at the subject.
I called our mutual friend, Frank Rich, who's an executive producer on Succession, to see if I could get some inside scoop on you. He said, he told me you'd be the easiest interview of my career. So he also wanted me to ask you about your loving, almost parental relationships with some of the actors on the show, like Kieran Culkin and Sarah Snook. So talk to me about, and all of us, about working with some of these enormously talented young actors.
Well, Sarah was already an accomplished actress. She had a very fine career in Australia in the theatre, and she's just astonishing. Her diction sometimes I worry about, but she's quite good.
She's Australian.
No, it's not just the Australian, it's the ends of... I'm going to talk about that tonight when I'm doing the Shakespeare thing. Clarity is important, and in a show like this, you sometimes can toss the words away a little too much. Anyway, that's a different note. But Sarah is formidable. She's absolutely formidable in the role. In the last series, the last 2 episodes, the last episode that my wife insisted I watch, I never watch it. I always view it's bad enough doing it without having to watch it. But my wife does make me watch it. And it was so good, and she was so extraordinary in that last episode, as was Matthew, both of them. But the real hero for me is Kieran Culkin. Thank you. Because Kieran, he'd not worked for quite a while. He came along, and they originally were thinking him for Nick, for Nick's part, Greg. And he wasn't interested in Greg. He really wanted to play Roman. And he got the role, finally got the role. And when he came, when he started, he was very nervous. This was a big job for him. And to see his growth over the 6 years that we've been working is phenomenal. when we always get, everybody used to get these, what they call alt lines, because essentially our writers are comic writers. They always have the alt line, so there's always an alt gag. Now, when it was first suggested to Kieran, he had 2 alt lines, and he freaked out. He didn't know what to do. He thought, what am I going to do? I said, you'll be fine, just do it. It's okay, you'll be fine. By the end of the show, he was doing 5 pages of alt lines.
You kind of got that sense because he's so...
And he just became more and more wonderful. And to see him grow and gain in confidence, and to see what a job does to an actor in that way, where suddenly they blossom in the most extraordinary way. And that was what was so wonderful about working with Kieran and seeing him come to that, as with the others.
Meanwhile, though, it's pretty obvious that Jeremy Strong, Brian, got on your last nerve. He plays Kendall Roy, and he's a method actor. I've been reading a lot about this and insisted on staying in character. When you say he should celebrate his gift and go back to his trailer and have a hit of marijuana.
That's the best way to do it.
Why are you not a fan of method acting, and how does that differ from your approach to a role?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I'll try and make it as short as I can. The group theater in the 1930s in New York, which was Elia Kazan, John Garfield, Lee Strasberg, Cheryl Crawford, Bobby Lewis, sorry. And they started this group theater. And they all were great believers in the work of Stanislavski. And there was this one element in Stanislavski's work, which was called, the Americans, you guys call it emotional memory. Stanislavski called it affective memory. And it's a kind of condition that you go through where you revisit trauma of childhood. And it's supposed to open you up emotionally. But it's without thought, and that's what the difficulty is. So the great Stella Adler was very questioning about what was going on. So she decided to take herself to Paris, where she knew that Stanislavski spent the summers, because he was allowed to do that. And she went to see him, and she said, Maestro, we've started this group theater, and we're all great believers in your work, and we want to know, we're just questioning the notion of affective and emotional memory. And Stanislavski, oh, I got rid of that years ago. He said, no. He said, no, it's fine, in minuscule form, if there's a necessary thing that needs to be dealt with. He said, but it does interfere with the imagination. It stops the imagination flowing. And that's why I stopped it. So she goes back to New York, and there's this big meeting. They're all in the theater. And she comes to the question, so what did the maestro say? And he said, well, affective emotional memory, he doesn't believe in it anymore. And there was a silence. And Strasberg said, then Stanislavski is wrong. Hence the method acting. And I mean, it worked for a certain extent. I mean, it was great in the 50s. But you see, Brando, contrary to what everybody felt, Brando was never a method actor. James Dean was, but Brando never was. Paul Newman was, because Brando actually studied with Stella Adler. He didn't study with Strasberg at all. I mean, he went to a couple of his classes and fooled around. He was a bit naughty that way. But so it's interesting. And what I believe that actors are is that I think we are instruments. We're transmitters. We transmit energy. Energy comes through us. And, I've worked with a lot of children, and I think children are the best actors. They don't do research. They don't prepare their roles. They don't go into an emotion. They just do it. And they do it because of the power of their imagination. There's a video which I would recommend to you.
Oh, it's on YouTube. Is this the one you teaching the child Hamlet?
Yeah. Have you seen it?
I haven't, but I read about it, and I'm going to.
I teach this 2.5-year-old boy to be or not to be, the speech, Hamlet speech. And he's extraordinary. He gets distracted, but he comes back. And it's wonderful to watch this kid who's just has a natural imagination that he allows to flow into the words. Now, that's what's important, is always never interfere with the imagination. Keep it free, keep it light. Of course, you go into dark areas, and that's part of the job. But sometimes, if you over-involve it, you kind of, it disrupts the harmony of the group.
Did you ever say to Jeremy Strong, knock it off?
No.
Did you want to?
What?
Did you want to?
Constantly. But I don't do that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. I mean, he knows how I stand, and we've, so that it's all come out. And we're very sweet. I mean, I love acting with Jeremy. Don't get me wrong. Jeremy's a wonderful actor. I just don't think he needs all that nonsense. I think he can do it without all of that. And he has, I mean, my example of that is Dan Day-Lewis, who is a brilliant actor, absolutely brilliant actor. I was watching the program that's on Steven Spielberg, and it was showing him, revisiting him as Abraham Lincoln. I thought it was an amazing performance. But Dan retires at the age of 55. From my point of view, as a 77-year-old, 55 is when the parts started to get better. That's when you really started to enjoy the work, because suddenly at the age of 55 you think, well, I know a bit now, I can actually do it a wee bit, But Dan's going, no, it's too much, it's all too painful, and you go, oh, bollocks, just do it.
And you've got incredible, exciting projects, which we'll talk about in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit more about Logan Roy, if I may. Mm-hmm. You talk about this character, how it's never fully explored, Logan, and what makes him tick. And you said in one interview that it comes from a bitter experience. It's a mystery because Jesse Armstrong hasn't revealed it. I mean, you saw me swimming in season 1, episode 7, and you see the marks on my back, but it's never explained. When you were playing Logan Roy, did you think about childhood hurts or trauma, or what was motivating this very complicated man?
Well, it all lies with his sister Rose. He has a sister Rose. It's very interesting that, I don't know if Jesse realizes this, but the girl in the Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams' sister, is called Rose, ironically enough. So she had polio, she got polio, and he may have given it to her. That's what he feels. So that's his bitter thing, that's his thing that he's most angry with himself for, and he blames himself for the death of his sister. And Jamie Cromwell, in the funeral scene, does this brilliant oration. I thought it was really moving, and then Kieran's reaction was just equally moving about telling the story, the background of the family. And I just felt that Logan is constantly misunderstood. He's regarded as being this bully or Hector. Well, he does all of that. But all he wants to do is find a successor from his own children to take over his job, to take over the business. And they don't, I mean, my favorite line in the whole show is, I love you, but you are not serious people. And that is the clue to everything.
It's really about entitlement.
Exactly, it's about entitlement. That they're playing the entitlement game all the time. They haven't, naturally, they're there at the front line, so therefore they should be able to take over and should be. But they haven't got the balls to do it, none of them. And also, they vacillate so much. I mean, he thinks that he has a strong feeling about Shiv. He really does think that Shiv could do it, and he hopes that. But then Shiv, she just dissipates everything. She talks too much. She's going to one way, then the other. She loses the singularity of purpose, which she so clearly has in the beginning episodes, and it becomes very dissipated. So Logan is always in a state of having to deal with these children and deal with them in a way, yes, he's hectoring, yes, he's bullying, and yes, he's a particularly tough father. And he doesn't know how to express himself because he's never known how to express himself. So that's his loss, that's his tragedy, if you like. But I've always felt, I mean, there's an example. In the last episode of the end of the 3rd season, when Jeremy and I have that big sit-down dinner together, and Jeremy the guy brings on plates, and he hands the plate, and he said, "Oh, that's not for him. That's." And I know that that Kendall has done that to make me think, "Oh, that's poisoned," you know, and I go along with it because I know it's not poisoned. But I think it's a bloody silly thing to just do that thing of thinking, trying to make me think this is a poisoned plate. And so I bring in my grandson, and I get him to test the thing. And everybody thinks, oh, it's horrible what he's doing to his grandson. He's no intention of poisoning his grandson, because the bloody thing isn't poison. He knows that. But of course, everybody thinks, oh, that's so cruel. But they don't understand what the real motive is. The real motive is to say, listen, Kendall, you are making such a stupid mistake. And doing these little gestures where you're trying to make me think one thing will not work. It will not work. It will not cut any mustard with me. And that's what's so great about the role, is the role is open to such delicacy of interpretation.
I want to spend a few minutes just talking about your childhood, Brian, because you grew up, as you mentioned, in working class Dundee. Your father was a shopkeeper. Your mom worked at a jute mill.
She did originally, yes.
And I know your dad died when you were just 8 years old and left you and your mom pretty destitute.
Yeah.
You've said that your early life in poverty affects you even today.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like
talk about that.
It's the Damocles sword that hangs over my head. I mean, it just is. You know, when you live at the level of poverty that we lived at after my father passed, it was pretty awful. But the irony was, I didn't feel it at the time. I just got on with it, as you do. You just adjust. You know, you lose somebody, you adjust. And, you know, it's just, you know, we so underestimate our own powers. We're constantly looking at belief systems to help us out, but we forget about who we are, how important memory is to us, and how we are sustained by memory. And we underestimate memory because we all have it. That's what we all share. We all share the memories of our loved ones, of those who've passed. And we carry those. I mean, my sister, my 92-year-old sister, who looked after me a lot from a distance when I was, you know, at that time, she passed just recently, and she's still with me. I mean, she'll always be with me. My dad is still with me. My mum is still with me. These people are still with us. And we forget that's an extraordinary power that we have, that power to hold on to those people from the past.
You lived across from a fish and chip shop,
yeah.
And you would go over there as a little boy asking, well, you tell the story.
Well, it only happened didn't happen all the time, but I mean, my mother was she was in a hospital for nervous diseases. She had a series of nervous breakdowns, and then she had electric shock treatment, which, I mean, she lost something like, I think she lost about, I don't know, well, I can only say in English, 5 stone, which is a lot of 5 4s of 25, 70 pounds. She lost 70 pounds. And she was very thin. And she only got her pension on a Friday morning. So on Thursday, we probably didn't have any money at all. So it wasn't all the time, it was once or twice. So I would go across to the fish and chip shop, and I would ask for batter bits from the back of the chip pan. And that would be our dinner. So they would pack up the batter bits and give it to us, and that's what we ate.
I know that the theater, acting, movies, kind of, they saved you in a way.
Oh, yeah.
I read that there were 21, how could this be, 21 movie theaters?
21 cinemas. There were 21 cinemas in my hometown in the 50s. Now there are 3. And it was amazing.
You would go constantly?
I'd go to all of them. From the age, I went to the cinema, this is the other thing, I went to the cinema on my own from the age of 6. You know, I would go off, disappear. And my mother said, where have you been? I said, been in the movies, in the pictures. We called it the pictures back home.
And you fell in love with one actor in particular.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, yeah. Spencer Tracy, to me, is probably the greatest screen actor ever because of his delicacy, his commitment, and his comedy. I mean, TCM is under great threat at the moment. Warner Brothers wants to stop it, and I think it's a shame, it's tragic, because Turner Classic Movies provides an enormous service about the history of cinema. And to see, there's just been a Katharine Hepburn season, to see Hepburn and Tracy in the movies they did together, and to see the delicacy and the beauty of the work they did is, for me, it's a joy. I mean, it's like, you know, it's my encyclopedia, you know.
You not only went to see movies several times a week, but you joined the Dundee Repertory Theater when you were just 14.
Yeah, well, I got the job when I was 14, but I started when I was 50.
But you were basically, you went there to run errands, right?
Yeah, I just used to take the money to the bank, and I did a lot of idiotic things as well.
And then you left for London at 17.
Yeah, I went to, yeah.
And
but as soon as I walked into the theater, because my family had become so broken up, I felt at home. I felt this was my home. And I felt that all my life. I mean, the theater has really sustained me, and I'm so grateful to it.
Was there a moment when you realized this is my gift, this is what I want to do, this is where I'm going to put all my energy?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same commitment that a priest has, that anybody who wants some kind of spiritual experience has, because there's a lot of spiritual stuff comes out of the theater, actually.
Was there a role, though? Was there a moment? Do you remember, or do you remember just feeling?
No, I just gradually, it came bit by bit, you know, and it's so weird now that I play this iconic figure at the age of, I'm now 77, and it's just so bizarre, because I've done so much over the years. I mean, I've made something like about 209 films altogether, which is probably more than most people, because I just kept working. I mean, my thing was just to keep working. And then Jesse comes up with this role, and my life literally changes overnight.
I mean, do you like it? Does it make you uncomfortable? How do you feel about this newfound fame, if you will?
Well, it's lovely on one level, but I didn't realize how much I prized my anonymity. You know, the fact that people didn't know who I was. And I actually quite liked that. I mean, people would say, oh, you were, oh no. Yes, you were, weren't you? Oh no, you weren't. You know, that was usually what it was for me. But, you know, now I can't go anywhere. You know, I mean, it's just really difficult. I mean, I did a fashion show with Nicole. We did this fashion show in Paris just recently, and now
you were attending. You weren't on the runway.
I wasn't on the runway, but they put me in clothes.
He's become quite the fashionista.
Well, I'm now, according to GQ, the fashion icon of the moment. I mean,
I like your Ralph Lauren outfit.
Exactly, but I could barely tie my shoelaces. I really find it extraordinary, really.
Well, I think it's so exciting to see this success, even though you've had the talent all along. And I mentioned all these exciting projects you have on the horizon. Next year, you'll be playing James Tyrone in Long Day's Journey into Night on the West End. You're also set to play Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yeah, I'm doing that in September.
In September?
Yeah.
And it's called Score? Is that a play?
It's a score. It's a play written by Oliver Cotton, and it's about Bach. It's very much in the line of what's going on now, warmongering with Putin, and Frederick the Great was a great warmonger, and Bach, Frederick the Great wanted him to join his coterie of composers because he collected them, and he was a closet composer himself, and Bach resisted, and it's a really interesting play about how he dealt with it. And we're going to do that in Bath.
You also have your directorial debut.
I have which was supposed to happen now, but I've delayed that till next year. So I'm.
That's a film called Glen
Rothen. It's a film about two brothers running. Well, one brother runs the distillery, and the other brother was the talent, but he left 35 years before, and he's been brought back into the fold for different reasons. So it's a great script.
So you're 77, but as you've mentioned twice, and I mean, the world. Your oyster. Isn't it amazing?
It's pretty incredible. I mean, it really is. I mean, I would never, I'm just sorry that some of my relations aren't around anymore to witness, you know, that it's all worked out rather well in the end.
And meanwhile, of course, I've enjoyed you extolling the virtues of the sesame seeds on the bun of a quarter pounder recently. As the voice of McDonald's, how in the fuck did that happen?
Well, you know, I used to do a lot of voice. I mean, when I came to America in 1996, came to live here, because I decided I'd done everything that I could do, and you know, I had a great career, but I still wanted to do movies. That was my childhood ambition. And you know, we do television in the UK, but we don't really do movies. And I thought, well, I'll go. But I had to give up my voiceover career, which is pretty good in the UK. And I couldn't get arrested for voiceovers here for 20 years. Suddenly, Logan Roy and McDonald's go hand in hand, which is a bizarre situation. So, you know, and I love it. And the copywriters, he said, when you get into it and you see these young writers writing these very tight things and being really rather brilliant, you know, you forget what, you know, and they all want to be proper writers, you know, but that's how they earn their living. So it's a great job. I loved it.
Will you do the thing at the end?
Oh, ba da ba ba ba, yeah.
Do it better.
I can't. I can't do it. I've always got to listen to it before I do it.
Well, I think you sound great in it, and it makes me want a quarter pounder. Well, Frank Rich was right. Not only are you the easiest interview of my career, but one of the most fun. So, Brian Cox. And by the way, I brought you a present.
Okay, this is all I have to say to you now.
I cleaned it up.
That concludes today's afternoon of conversation. Thank you so much to Festival 1 participants. For Festival 2 participants, whose first day is today, Brian will be back in conversation with Michael Eisner and Simon Godwin at 8:15 p.m. tonight. But first, starting at 5:30, make your way over to the Wheeler Opera House for the Case